Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're exploring an absolutely fascinating paradox in the world of winemaking, and that is crafting natural sweet wines. We so often think of winemaking as this completely organic process, right? Like we just let nature run its course and do its thing. But as we're going to see today, making a truly exceptional sweet wine, well, it's actually a masterclass in the art of the interruption.
Because, think about it, how exactly do you keep a wine sweet without losing the alcoholic buzz? I mean, a yeast's literal biological job is to eat grape sugar and turn it into alcohol. That's what they do. If you let those microscopic workers do their job completely, you just end up with a dry wine that has high alcohol. But if you stop them too early, well then you get a sweet but very low alcohol fruit juice. So getting both, that high sweetness and sufficient alcohol, requires a highly calculated, masterful intervention by the winemaker.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the sweet wine paradox, then zoom in on the fermentation race. From there, we'll look at halting the process, explore the art of fortification, and finally, look at choosing the spirit. Basically, journeying from the raw grape all the way to the carefully aged bottle. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the sweet wine paradox. In this stage, the winemaker basically steps into the role of a conductor. They have to intentionally interrupt nature's normal course. And this right here is the core of that paradox: chasing residual sweetness. Now, residual sweetness is the natural grape sugar that deliberately remains in the wine after fermentation is stopped. And it's absolutely crucial to understand that this isn't, sugar added from a bag. It is the original natural sweetness from the sun-ripened grape itself. So this residual sweetness is necessary to perfectly balance the wine's acidity and overall flavor. But if winemakers don't actively pull the brakes, the yeast will consume absolutely all of that sugar, literally eliminating the sweetness entirely.
Moving right along to Section 2, the fermentation race.
To really understand how we pull those brakes, we first need to look at those microscopic workers, the yeast, and the high-stakes race they're running. To control this race, the winemaker meticulously manipulates the fermentation kinetics. And there are three main factors at play here. First up, the yeast strain. Winemakers actually choose specialized yeast strains that have a lower alcohol tolerance. They're specifically hiring workers that will, get tired and stop early. Second is sugar concentration. Simply put, the higher the sugar levels in the must, the slower the fermentation speed. It kind of bogs them down. And third is temperature. Higher temperatures accelerate the yeast's activity, while lower temperatures cool things off and slow it down. So by balancing the yeast, the sugar, and the temperature, the winemaker perfectly sets the stage for that grand interruption.
Which brings us to Section 3, halting the process.
Okay, so here is how you pull the emergency brake on those microscopic workers. We've got three primary interventions. Number one is cooling. By drastically dropping the temperature of the must, the yeasts literally become too cold to function and just cease their activity. The second method is adding sulfur dioxide, or SO2. This compound directly inhibits yeast growth. And finally, there's filtration. Now, this one is less commonly used, but it involves physically passing the wine through a filter to completely remove the yeast from the liquid, literally taking the workers right off the job site.
All right, on to Section 4, the art of fortification.
Now, sometimes cooling or filtering just isn't the path they choose. Sometimes the winemaker relies on the ultimate heavy-handed intervention. But before we get into the chemistry of it, consider the incredible history here. Fortification actually originated centuries ago as a literal life hack. Producers needed a way to stabilize their wines so they wouldn't just spoil during these long, distant ocean voyages to global markets. So it was purely practical, right? Just a simple preservative trick to help cargo survive at sea. But the historical irony is that this simple little trick accidentally created the beloved, beautifully balanced luxury beverage that we get to enjoy today.
16 to 20%. That right there is the magic window for total alcohol by volume in a fortified wine. See, by deliberately adding alcohol to hit this very specific ABV range, the winemaker permanently kills off the yeast. It instantly stops fermentation, completely locks in that crucial residual sweetness we talked about earlier, and creates an entirely stable wine.
So, how does that actually happen in practice? Well, it's a super precise balancing act. Here is the 5-step methodology used in the winery. Step 1 is the initial fermentation, where that carefully controlled yeast activity begins. Step 2 is the main event, fortification. This is where we add the alcohol to abruptly halt fermentation right when the sweetness is absolutely perfect. Step 3 involves strict temperature control, just to ensure the yeast doesn't somehow reactivate. Sneaky little guys. Step 4 is mixing and stabilisation. That's gently homogenizing the wine so the sugars and alcohol are evenly distributed. And finally, Step 5 is aging and maturation. This is usually done in barrels or tanks, where the raw materials finally combine to develop that deep aromatic complexity and structure.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, choosing the spirit.
Because the process of adding alcohol isn't just about chemistry, right? It's actually the final artistic decision the winemaker makes to shape the wine's ultimate flavor profile. The alcohol they use to fortify the wine is essentially the winemaker's palate. For instance, using a neutral alcohol preserves the natural, original flavors of the grape without really adding anything new. But if they use a grape spirit, which is distilled from grapes, it adds these specific, nuanced flavor notes to the profile. Then there's wine alcohol. This one is actually distilled from the very same base wine, which brilliantly maintains total flavor consistency. And lastly, brandy. Because brandy is barrel-aged, adding it to the wine imparts these rich, woody, and oaky characteristics. Really, these are the final paint strokes on a canvas, dramatically altering the headspace, the aroma, and the overall complexity of the final product.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today, and it leaves us with this final thought. What moment in time will you taste in your next glass? Because when you pour a natural sweet wine, you aren't just tasting grapes. You're tasting a precise, scientific interruption. You're tasting the exact moment a winemaker decided to pull the brakes, combined with the artistic choice of the spirit they used to do it. So the next time you enjoy a dessert wine, I highly encourage you to remember this precise process and taste the science behind the sweetness.